In this episode, I'll be reviewing the brilliant performance given by Montgomery Clift in Judgment at Nuremberg. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast exploring storytelling on film, as well as interviews with industry professionals who work in film, television, theater, among other areas of the arts. For those of you who haven't seen Judgment at Nuremberg, I will read out a short synopsis. In 1948, an American court in occupied Germany tries 4 Nazis judged for war crimes. This was directed by Stanley Kramer, and it was written by Abby Mann. It was released in 1961. Some of the cast includes Spencer Tracy, Burt Lancaster, Richard Widmark, Marlene Dietrich, Maximilian Schell, Judy Garland, of course Montgomery Clift, and William Shatner. It's got a brilliant cast. Clift gives a phenomenal performance in this film that is truly haunting, that is so real that it's scary to me, that when I close my eyes and envision this scene, I can hear the pain in his voice and the anguish that his character went through, that he truly brought to it. But his character's name is Rudolph Peterson. And so during these trials, what happens is the prosecutor, played by Richard Widmark, one of the prosecutors, calls him up as a witness because during the 1930s, he was sterilized by the Nazis. So for those of you who don't know, in the 30s in Germany, if you had they passed a law, the Nazis, that if you had a mental or physical disability of any kind, they could legally force you to be sterilized. And so he was sterilized because they claimed that he had a mental disability. So what happens here is when they called him up, his father was a communist, and the Nazis actually ran into where they lived and tried to beat his father up, and who Clift plays, Rudolph, and his brothers, went out on the street, they got into a fight with the Nazis. They managed to beat them up, and they turned them over to the police. And now, sometime later, Rudolph Peterson was brought in, and they forced him to become sterilized. And this, of course, clearly ruined his life. Now you can imagine how one would feel if they were basically told that there's something wrong with you, that you do not deserve to have any children of any kind. Now, I mean, they say sterilized, so I'm not sure if perhaps maybe because of the production code at that time, you couldn't say castrated, because there was also castrations happening at this time. And which I'm going to get into in a bit, the documentary that Clift's nephew co-directed, Robert Clift, called Making Montgomery Clift, which you can watch on Tubi, the app, for free. They have recordings of Clift talking to Stanley Kramer about this, and he keeps saying that he mentions it as castration. So I'm not sure, but either way, I mean, obviously the castration is way, way worse than being forced to become sterilized. But nonetheless, they ruined this man, emotionally scarred him, and forced him to do it, as he describes being forced down on a hospital bed, and there was nothing he could do about it. He tried to hide, he tried to run. And this is what they did. But Clift is absolutely phenomenal. And once the defense of the Nazis come up, the other lawyer, the character Hans Rolf, played brilliantly by Maximilian Schell, the suggestion I got from it was that he was trying to say that these people on trial now were just doing their job, because the law had been passed that if you had a mental or physical disability, that you had to get sterilized. And so he was trying to say that Rudolph was had some kind of mental disability. So he talks about the fact that he had dropped out of school. So he tries to suggest that he wasn't a good student. And then what really sets off Rudolph, played by Clift, is talking about the fact that his mother had mental health issues, which he denies. And again, it's truly startling when you see Clift as Rudolph stand up and scream out, "That is not true, that is not true." And then it's so heartbreaking when he takes the picture out of his pocket of his mother and asks the jury and everybody in the courtroom, "This is my mother. Is she feeble-minded? Does she look feeble-minded?" And he's having this nervous breakdown while doing, while up there on the stand, and it is truly stunning acting. Again, it is so real that in a way it's almost hard to look at. So I imagine what Richard Widmark's character, the prosecutor, was getting at was that they targeted Montgomery Clift's character Rudolph because of the fact that him and his brothers beat up these Nazis, and that his father was a communism. So, in other words, he didn't have a mental. No one can prove he had a mental or physical disability. It was targeted out of revenge because him and his brothers beat up this Nazi. That was the suggestion. And of course, then Maximilian Schell was trying to suggest, no, his mother had a mental health illness. It was clearly hereditary. He left school. He didn't do good at school. And of course, this is what gets Rudolph so angry. As soon as you see Clift, he looks so nervous and timid as he approaches the stand, and he just, in his reactions, just spoke volumes, and his face, he just looked like he was in so much pain, emotional turmoil, and it also brought a odd behavior to him, which makes it ambiguous whether he had mental health issues or not. Doesn't matter, even if he did. The fact that whether it was castration or sterilization, for anyone who knows for certain if it was castration or sterilization, they say sterilization, but I wonder if they meant castration. If anyone knows, comment below, because he even has that line later on where he says, I'm half of what I used to be. So I couldn't help but wonder if what they actually mean is to be castrated. But it ultimately, the defense was trying to say that, oh, well, we don't know whether he was mentally ill or not. And so if they say he was mentally ill, there's nothing we can do about it. And that was the law. And so I really think he was trying to provoke him, Maximilian Schell, by bringing up his mother, saying his mother had mental health issues and things like that. But even Maximilian Schell, you sense a guilt from him that he was setting this man off and emotionally, and everybody else seems to are careful with how they talk to him. Even Spencer Tracy asks him a question, and then when Rudolph didn't quite understand the question, he repeats the question, and he's very careful with it. So you don't know it's ambiguous. Like, what are they being careful because they think there may be something wrong with him? It's interesting, just on a performance level. I'm not sure what kind of a choice Clift would have brought to that in terms of any kind of a mental health problem that really truly stood out. But it doesn't matter, because that's not really the point, whether he had a mental health issue or not. The point is that they ruined this guy's life because they said he did. And it's heartbreaking to watch. I mean, he's not even getting upset. Like, he is truly in agony. The inflections in his voice, in his behavior, and Clift in the documentary, because his brother tape recorded everything, all his phone conversations, which of course his son now had, and so he went through all the tapes, and you hear the conversation between Kramer, the director, Stanley Kramer, and Clift, and he talks about the fact that he really felt that this character would have a real dignity, that he wouldn't, even if he was getting emotional, he would not truly break. He would try to hold it together. And Clift was getting choked up just talking about the scene. I mean, that's the great thing about Clift, and I know other actors have said this, that he was an actor who truly went for the truth. He truly committed and dug his way to get to the truth of a scene. And that, to me, is why he's one of the greatest actors of all time. And this is surely one of his best performances. And he actually said in an interview that it's one of his favorite performances that he gave. But the trivia around this is also interesting, because now what has been long believed, what's an ongoing belief here, was that Cliff couldn't remember his lines, that he was truly troubled and he was truly tortured because of his car accident that had happened a few years prior, 2 or 3 years prior, where he had to get surgery on his face and they had to reconstruct his face. And the fact that he had, he was an alcoholic. And so this belief is that because that this character is also tortured emotionally, that what we're watching isn't even a performance. It's just Clift breaking down. And even Patricia Bosworth, who is his biographer, wrote in the book, he was panicking before the scene. He was so nervous. And I just found this trivia here on imdb.com. It says here, Montgomery Clift had difficulty with his lines, cues, and timing. He told Stanley Kramer he didn't know if he could actually get through the scene. Kramer did his best to reassure him, but it was Spencer Tracy who eventually helped Clift through it. Perhaps drawing on his own years of alcoholism, Tracy spoke to the younger actor with sympathy but with firmness, even relaxing his own dictum about sticking strictly to the script. Just look into my eyes and do it. You're a great actor and you understand this guy. Stanley doesn't care if you throw aside the precise lines. Just do it into my eyes and you'll be magnificent. Clift spent 4 days getting through the 7-minute sequence, stumbling through and performing each take differently. At the end of his last take, the set broke out into spontaneous applause. Monty's condition gave the performance an aura, as though it were being shot through muslin. The way the words tumbled and the disjointed sudden bursts of lucidity out of a mumble, Kramer said later. It was classic. It was one of the best moments in the film. Some film historians and critics have since suggested that Kramer knew exactly what he was doing by casting such broken and erratic performers as Judy Garland and Clift in roles that called for expressions of pain, embarrassment, and terror. So now what his nephew shows in the documentary, now it says here, Montgomery Clift had difficulty with lines, cues, and timing. They show Montgomery Clift's script, his notes, and he had notes all over it, and he would change lines, but he always did that. He always improvised, he always changed lines and worked with the director and things like that. And so you see lines crossed out, and then in right beside the lines he would change the line. And so he showed some of the scene with the script right beside the scene being played, and what he wrote down, and it's a combination of the script and his improvisations, what he writes in the script is exactly what he says in the scene. So the fact that it says here, difficulty with lines, cues, and timing, is that really true? Because like I said, if you go and watch Making Montgomery Clift, the Robert Clift, his nephew who co-directed it, shows the scene right beside the dialogue, and he does not go off of it, even though he changed lines. But again, he always did that. So for some reason, after his car accident and his increasing, the fact that he was drinking heavily, and this whole thing with not knowing lines, I don't know why this became why everyone now suddenly believe that in this film that's not even a performance, like that's just him, having a full-on breakdown. So there's two sides to every story, and here we have some facts along it, which is that he doesn't go off script, which was what everyone is saying. Now this puts what people have been saying about Clift in doubt. Now, another story, of course, later was that when he worked with John Huston in the film Freud, he was sued for not knowing his lines, which put the film over budget and all this stuff. And they said, Huston said that he didn't know his lines. And it caused all these sorts of delays. And Clift, in his recordings with his brother, said this wasn't true, that the lines were not great, and that he wanted to change certain things. And on top of that, Huston was rewriting the script constantly. And so they were getting revisions, up until the night before they were going to shoot, if not on the day of. And he shows in the documentary the different versions of all the script. And so as an actor myself, memorizing lines is a chore within itself. So the fact that you're going to get a new scene, on the day of, that you have to memorize, or the night before, if it's a long scene, that's quite challenging. So again, two sides to every story, but it puts these long-held beliefs that Clift was so tortured, and these performances are a real torture. Like it says here, get a broken and erratic performers. Erratic. The documentary really, again, proves that is not the whole truth. I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know. I can only go by what's been written and what the documentary. But it really makes you think how much of this is true, or how much of it was fabricated for the sake of a great story in the press and in Hollywood gossip. And he also shows that on the biography channel, they have these A&E specials where they talk about, a biography of different people's lives. And they showed some of the tape recordings with his brother that his brother recorded. And he talks about how he really wanted to win an Oscar for Freud, and where they took it out of context, and he played in the documentary the entire conversation. And the reason he wanted to win was because he was getting sued for not knowing his lines. And he thought, well, wouldn't it be something if he had to go there with his Oscar statue and to the jury and think, do you really believe I, held up production if they gave me an Oscar for it? Not only that, Huston had hired him before on a brilliant film that I've reviewed called The Misfits, and he's gave a brilliant performance in that. And so if he was such a troubled actor, why did Huston hire him again? So these are questions that are posed in the documentary, which are really interesting. But nonetheless, the performance is stunning. So whether he was using anything that was really happening to him at that time or not, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, he's playing a character. He is in front of a camera and he is telling a story. So it's still a performance, no matter what, whether it's far removed for him or not, or if he could strongly relate to the torture of the character he played, Rudolph. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, he's acting, and it's truly a stunning, stunning performance. So if you haven't seen Judgment at Nuremberg, I highly recommend checking it out. I really like the film, but just for Clift alone is well worth it. It's a great, great performance. What's also interesting is that Clift was offered a different part in the film, a much bigger part, which he thought was boring. And his asking fee from his agents was $300,000. And so he wanted this part, which is one scene. The whole scene is 16 minutes. And so they were like, well, how are we going to give him $300,000 for 16 minutes? And his agents would not budge. And they said, no, they pay the $300,000 or they don't get you. So he went to Stanley Kramer directly and said, I'll do it for free. So he actually did this film for free. That's how much he wanted to do this film. And that's what I admire so much about Clift, was that he didn't play Hollywood's game. He did what interested him, and he did parts that would challenge him, and he took on parts in movies that he felt were truly worth telling. So that's a mark of a true artist. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. And if this is your first time here on my YouTube channel, please consider subscribing by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Also, comment below. Let me know what you think of this film. Let me know what you think of Montgomery Clift's performance in the film. Hit the like button, and I will see you in the next episode.